I think we're going to begin. So welcome to the second session on the discussion of the movie A Time for Burning. So I was just telling Toya and Kevin that yesterday we had a showing of the film in the Fellowship Hall, and given the onset of the storm, we didn't have very many people, but we had 2 of our youth and 2 parents and an elder, and Jill came with her kids, so we had a really great discussion afterwards. So I'm privileged that now I can continue the discussion with Toya and Kevin, especially after their experience of the film. So welcome, Toya and Kevin, to continue this powerful conversation about racism in the Lutheran Church. So here we go.
Woohoo! Thank you, Pastor Daniel, for that wonderful introduction. I'm not entirely sure how this is gonna go, but I'm gonna kind of wing my half of this because we have a lot to cover. Well, Kevin Dragseth has a lot to cover, not necessarily me. The first thing I think I want to ask everybody that's sitting here is how many of you watched this film? Okay, so pretty much everybody. And for those of you who didn't watch it, I don't know if there was any that didn't, but if you didn't, what are you hoping to gain out of this conversation today, just out of curiosity? But if you all watched it, then you can scratch that question. For those of you who did watch it, I guess first off, I want to say I consider this a safe space. I consider this place where we are in this conversation an honest conversation. I don't want any of you to feel like you can't answer the question that I ask you because I am the only African American person in this building right now. I don't want you to feel, like I will take offense. As far as I'm concerned, this is our home. We love this congregation. We love the people in this congregation. And you guys, as far as I'm concerned, are all family. And I think this is an opportunity for us to have the conversations that maybe some of us have not had an opportunity to have for whatever reason. And I'm pretty much open when it comes down to these kinds of conversations. I'm used to having them. I was born and raised in the cities. I've lived here most of my life with the exception of maybe 10 or 11 years when I lived out west. But I went to school here, I graduated from here, I did college from here, and like a lot of people, I have found myself in spaces where I am the only one. And sometimes there have been situations where I felt like I was representing, not because I wanted to, but because people thought that that was what I was supposed to do. So I'm not here to represent today. I'm here to have honest conversation and dialogue with you all because this was a really interesting film for me to watch because I had never seen it before and did not really think that those kinds of conversations that were trying to be had were hard to have. So, for those of you that watched it, what was your honest feeling about what you saw? Despair. Despair, why?
Because we haven't come very far, and it's so, just lack of courage, lack of courage.
Okay, so Kristen says despair due to lack of courage and not feeling like we've come very far. Anybody else?
I can run the mic around.
Daniel's.
I wonder, would people be willing to come closer? Or I know we've got to spread out a bit, so maybe that doesn't work. Sorry. Forget I said it.
Well, it seemed like at least now we have overcome the legal barrier of segregation, but if you look around, it is not it is still pretty segregated. Community is still pretty segregated. And also the kind of logic behind why it is kind of the same. Like, well, you know, if you watch the movie, you'll know there's this lady and she said, well, you know, I want them to have all the same blessings as us. I just can't stand to be with them. And it kind of feels the same way. Like they won't have like affordable housing. We can't have those dirty poors around here. Or people will find every excuse. They'll just like feel uncomfortable for whatever reason.
Amen.
What do you think made it so hard for that church to address race? I know that you mentioned discomfort, which is huge. Do you think there was anything else besides that that made it uncomfortable? Reputation. Okay. Anything else anybody else can think of? Finances, okay.
No, really. They were afraid people were going to leave the congregation and not give.
Oh, okay, yeah. Okay, that makes sense. Somebody else had their hand up?
I would say fear, but that's a lot of the fear was fear of, you know, they were talking about property values declining, and fear of people leaving the church, not being, you know, using what they had.
Right, okay.
There weren't enough people standing up for the positive.
Right.
They're all, only the people complaining
Right.
made a voice. So if the people on the other side would have spoken up.
Right.
Lack of bravery.
Yes, lack of bravery for sure. So I think, Daniel?
I was just going to say I think they're all powerful scenes, but one scene where they're all meeting, it was a mixed interracial group, and Ernie Chambers was there with Ray, who was that white congregant who had kind of gone through that transformation. And remember, Ernie was he just wouldn't let up. He was like, is your pastor receiving positive or negative feedback from trying to speak the truth about racism?
Right.
And Ray would not answer straight. He wouldn't say the truth. And finally, at the end, I think Ernie Chambers said it, which was, I think what you're doing is prevaricating because you don't want to admit the truth. And I get the sense that we white folks intuitively know what we've done. And if we were to meet someone like Ernie Chambers, I suppose it's part of the fragility conversation, is that we kind of intuitively know what we're responsible for, and we cannot be confronted with it. We will not be confronted with it. That truth is too painful, I think.
So last week we talked a lot about sort of formation and kind of like how our brains are developed and how we sort of have this, what was it that Dad called? Mapping, how your brain just kind of automatically makes decisions or assumptions or preconceived notions about things based on experience or, in a lot of people's cases, a lack thereof. We talked about, just in terms of some of the reasonings why this was so hard in 1966, is fear, discomfort, lack of bravery. What do you think makes this church, taking all of that into consideration, what makes us different? Why would we be able, if it was proposed, to have those conversations today in 2022? What makes us stronger than Augustana to allow us to be able to do that? Because when you think about just geographically where we're located, and when you think about our mission and our values, and you think about what it means to be Christian and to love your neighbor, one of the things I think that was really riveting for me watching that film was how the youth, the black youth, and it's very telling that there wasn't any feedback from the white youth, which I was a little disappointed about, because I thought you have these black kids who have been in this church for one service, and they had a lot of feedback between each other, right? But there wasn't anything in the film about what the congregation's kids felt about having that visit, right? And they talked a lot about what it means to be Christian. We talk about loving our neighbor. We talked about it in our sermon today. You know, it's in the new creed that we read about how God loves all tribes. And if that's true, if that is true, why was it so hard for those Christians to love other Christians even though they don't look like them? Why does the outward appearance prevent one neighbor from loving another? And what makes us different? What makes us different? How can we do something different than what that church did? I think that's the most important question to me. We've had lots of conversations about how to become a more diverse congregation. And in all honesty, I don't think that that's possible. I don't think we can be, just because of where we're located. Can we have multicultural experiences, though? Can we give our youth real life experiences, either with other congregations or just outside of our congregation in general, so that they know what the rest of the world is like outside of St. Anthony Park? Can we do that? I think we can. But what makes us different? So if we were going to have those conversations today, what do you think would drive us to be successful where Augustana failed? Mike Leonard?
Did you raise your hand, Dave? Sure. Yeah.
I was just talking with a friend of mine on the phone last night about those issues with race, but also with what's going on in Iowa on people who don't identify with what they're born with. And I think the thing is, this is a big issue for people of our generation, and it's not an issue, I think, for the younger generation. And part of that was the article I read last week about the woman who was the first one admitted to Alabama University, until they found out she was black, and then they kicked her out. And she came back again later and got a degree from there, and recently they've named a building after her and various things. But the kids right now, I just don't think they ever experienced what we experienced growing up, just how you couldn't eat at the lunch counter, you couldn't get on a bus, all these things. So we've got that kind of ingrained in us, I think, in the older generation. I want to say...
Where did that come from? Where did that come from? I ask myself, how did it get ingrained in us?
So I grew up in Richfield, which isn't that far from here. I went to a high school. In my grades when I was there, 2,700 kids, one black boy. And he was the star of the basketball team, and everybody loved him, but he was the only one. If you don't have any experience, now my children went to Central. They played on the basketball teams, the volleyball team, whatever. They had friends. They got along just fine. They're more comfortable because they have experience. And I think that really drives things.
Yeah, and I would add to that, I went to Murray Senior High School. At its high point, we might have had 3 or 4 people of color in the school. The only black family in the park was on Eustis, the Schaffners, and they were required to build on the other side of Eustis there, kind of out of the community, just about, to get financing, So, anyway, I think, and I would just add one more thing. When Jill was called, that was an issue. This congregation knew that we were going to lose people, people from the seminary, people, just numerous people, but not that many. And we had the courage to do it. And I think we can have that courage again.
Amen. I just want to follow up on Toya's question. What do you think the things that you named make this congregation more in a better place than Augustana? Wasn't that your question? Those things, sort of the generational proximity questions and some other things that the church has done to explore equity issues?
I think there has been more an open congregation here. But at the same time, we need to let the youth and the middle-aged people kind of lead. They think that they're better designed for it, not to duck from it.
Yeah, Jerry?
Well, I would like to make a couple of points. But the one is that we don't spend near enough time making people educated to the fact is that there's as much difference between my eye colors and your eye colors. In other words, if you got blue eyes or you got brown eyes or you got the weird eyes that I have, that there is more difference there than there is whether you have a light skin or a dark skin. So the first thing that most people should know is that the genes are irrelevant to a large extent. Therefore, if there is something you're worried about, it has to be culture.
Yes.
And the best way to deal with that is through education. In other words, you want to say, what is one of the keys that this congregation has? It's the fact is that they're a well-educated congregation, broadly educated, deeply educated, and therefore they can understand things like the fact is that it's not skin color any more than it is eye color. Now, that's one thing. The other point I wanted to make is that I have spent a lot of time in different countries. And one of them is that in Nicaragua, it doesn't make any difference what color your skin is. You know, that the president of the one university I work with has dark skin, and the several janitors have white skin. And what happens is that they don't have the history of slavery, which people that aren't well educated don't understand. And you know what our country needs is to get to the point where we all understand that skin color is very little got to do with our genes, and that it's culture, and that the way to get around that is education, broad and deep.
Well said.
I agree with Jerry. Excuse me. I agree with Jerry. We are well educated. We're blessed with that. But then, is it a matter of demographics in this area that means that only the children of Kevin and Toya are black in this congregation, except for, okay, and Jill. She's Korean, I'm sorry, I apologize. And fair play, Kevin and Toya drive a ways to get here, but they choose to do that. And they drive by a couple Lutheran churches on the way. But there aren't a lot of African Americans in St. Anthony Park. That's been a long-term problem. And a lot of that is affordable housing, the lack thereof. A lot of that is the whole community is not known for being so liberal on this subject. So I think it doesn't mean we can't do anything, but we're kind of knocking our heads against a wall, and we may need to look at that wall differently.
I think that's what we need to do. And I'm going to talk for a little bit here because some important things have come up. Jerry mentioned culture. That's really at the core of this. It isn't demographics. It is the things we don't think about and the things we don't talk about. So I'm going to do a little table setting first because I think it's really easy our vocabulary has changed, and you make a great point about the next generation having better familiarity and tools and language for stuff than we have. A quick point is racism is bad, but it's false equivalence to say that racist equals bad. So I have racist tendencies, but I'm not a bad person. I mean, I think that's the line I'm trying to draw here. I do racist things and I have racist thoughts because I've been raised in it my entire life. Most of us had no choice, right? This is the system, the education we got, the way our families talked about stuff. So that's not bad, that is what it is. And that's the part we're trying to take apart, and that's where culture is the key. The other mistake is we talk about white supremacy as bigotry or hatred, and it certainly manifests that way. But so much of white supremacy is in our bodies, and it's in our culture. And it's in our bodies because the white body is the supreme standard of humanness. So when we talk about healthcare disparities for bodies of color, it's because all of it was invented around white bodies. And the same is true about beauty standards and how you can wear your hair to apply for a job, and the need to ask the question, do Black Lives Matter? Because it's further from the standard. A black body is further away from the white body standard. The other part of it is culture. This church is utterly European culture, and I love European culture. We went to Europe a couple years ago. I love it, still think about it, it's great. But the dominance of that culture means that how we talk and what songs we sing and how much emotion we show and whose classical music is classical music doesn't ever get asked. I was listening to NPR one day and they were playing like Jewish classical music and it sounded so amazing and interesting. And that's when I asked myself, I'd never thought whose classical is classical music. That European culture isn't bad, it's the fact that we don't examine the fact that it's the standard. So here's where I'm going to pivot. Whiteness is not our ancestral culture. Norwegian Americans, German Americans, whatever, that's not whiteness. Those are rich, beautiful cultural things with yummy foods and disgusting foods and stuff. But that's not whiteness. Whiteness was the exchange that our ancestors made for safety and power in America, when the Irish and the Italians and the Poles and the Greeks traded being those things to be white. That's what they got. They got the power and the safety of being white at the cost of their ancestral culture. And sorry, I keep getting choked up just because this stuff is it's important. So whiteness is a unity in skin color, not in culture. So never mistake whiteness for your ancestral culture. They're different. And we can love the one and we need to destroy the other. Also, guilt and shame. I don't want anybody here feel guilty or ashamed because that exchange was made in the past by our ancestors. Or maybe not even your ancestors, but our white people made that deal. And they may not have known what they were getting into. And somebody literally invented race like 400 years ago and premised a whole system of enslavement of humans on that. That's not us. We didn't create it, we didn't create whiteness, and we didn't choose whiteness, we were raised in it. So set the shame aside. We're only guilty if we don't want to change. So choosing whiteness was our ancestors' sin to the extent that they knew it, but leaving it unexamined will be ours if we choose not to. That will be our sin. And it was said bravely over here, discomfort will be our single greatest obstacle to that. A quick story. I love Indiana Jones. I love Indiana Jones. Do I love Indiana Jones?
You love Indiana.
How many Indiana Jones hats do I have?
Too much.
I was going to bring it until he made me not bring my hat. I
No,
love Indiana Jones.
he said it was a prop, and I was like, I'm out. I'm not participating. If you bring the hat,
So my white people
I'm
need
done.
props. They need objects.
He's like, I know my people. I was like, but come on.
So imagine me wearing an Indiana Jones hat. I love Indiana Jones. My favorite movie. I have like a whole costume, and I've made movies with my kids, okay? So that movie came out when I was like 7, and my neighbors took me to see it, and it's archaeology and history and all the stuff I love, and Gabriel is in a couple of episodes of Indiana Drag Seth when he was little. We had a costume party at my work, and TPT does an awesome Halloween thing, and so I wore mine, and a coworker wore her. She wanted to go as Indy, so I lent her some stuff, and we were like 2 Indiana Joneses. It was great. And a beloved, dear, incredible colleague of mine is Native American. And I looked at her, she didn't say anything, she just small smiles, and I went, oh my God, this is a symbol of colonization and destruction and literally stealing heritage out of temples. So what do you do with your favorite thing? What do you do when you love it and it's kind of your identity? And I had to say, I either stop loving Indiana Jones or I have to look at Indy and say, this is a problem. So I decided, I love Indy. I love Indy. But Indy is a symbol of some bad things. Indy does some bad things, and he says some bad things. And Indy represents some of the worst of our heritage, our story. So this is what we're going to do. What is our Indiana Jones? What are the symbols? What are the identities, the stories that we cherish that are problems? Before we do this is all with love, and there are no policy advocacy. I'm not telling you what to do or how to vote or what to change. And we're just going to name some things. You want to name some things?
And I feel like, I have to say this too for the record after going over the announcements and stuff today, I feel like this kind of segues into this writing workshop. We're talking about how we can be welcoming, right? And thinking about that and possibly participating in that and writing things down, this goes back to what is our Indiana Jones. So when you think about our congregation, and this kind of brings me back to, I think a couple summers ago, we made the attempt at reading a book called Dear Church. And I will tell you, as the only African-American person, I was extremely disappointed because it's a fabulous book by an African-American man who talked about his love for the Lutheran Church as a pastor. And he talked about where he came from, how he got to where he is, how forgiving and how welcoming, but all of the flaws as a congregation or as a sect, what our flaws are, and things that in certain practices and rituals that were not looked at, and how it would be perceived by somebody that is of color, that's not white, right? Like one of the things I think that he mentioned was something with respect to the robes and the color of the robes. The word black has always been sort of made to be this horrible thing. We start talking about culture and talking about skin color, right? We recently had to have a conversation with our daughter about the color of her skin. She's the fourth of 4 children. I've never had to talk to my boys about skin color. I mean, we had to have some other conversations with our oldest child, but with Black History Month, having conversations, learning about really important leaders, and her teacher must have said something to the effect of her that she's Black. And she was like, no, I'm not. And she came home and she's like, how could she say that? I am tan. And so we had to get into culture. African American, and we have always been open and honest with our kids about culture. I mean, as a single mother with my first 2 boys, we didn't talk about it a lot. I think I just thought that if no one said anything, we were all good. They would be perfectly fine with who they were. Nobody would question it. But the mistake I made was that I may not say something, but somebody else was. And once someone else said it, then I had to answer and have some very difficult conversations about who they were and what they look like. And so we had to talk about that. And when I think about our congregation and the different ritualistic things that we do, I think about my kids. I think about the fact that my son is gonna be in middle school. I think about the fact that he's gonna be confirmation age here pretty soon, right? And they may be the only 2 children in their confirmation classes or their youth groups, or they are now, that are the only children of color. And what in our church symbolizes them? I think I read an article one time where when you ask a kid, there might have been some kind of a study where you ask children to draw pictures of Jesus. and what does he look like to them, right? Well, we all know from the Bible that he wasn't white, yet he's white. So when we think about how we can be welcoming and how we can, make people feel like they belong, right? When we think about what's our Indiana Jones, I will tell you I am not a fan of the music. I do not come here to sing. I come here to hear the word. That is the only thing that fills me. The music, if I could put earplugs in and get away with it, I would. For those of you who sing, you have beautiful voices. I love how you sound. It's the tone, it's how does it receive me? What do I get? And I always feel like there's a possibility that I might fall asleep. Or you change things and I didn't get the memo, like the gathering song. I said to my brother-in-law, I was like, I didn't know that you could sing the Lord's Prayer. Like, I didn't know you could sing that. I feel like it's never been sung the entire time I've been here. So I was kind of like trying to find the tempo on that one, although the rest of you seem to have known it. And I was like, nobody told me. Anytime we change a song that I feel like I've just memorized, that kind of feels good, and you slow it down a lot, I'm like, okay, wake me up when we're done. So I can tell you that is my kryptonite right now. It has been the entire 10 years I've been in this church, is the music. I'm always like, and when it does get sped up, when it's something that feels like it's from a different culture, I'm like, heck yeah, that's something to be excited about. And of course, prior to you being here, I would not have jumped for joy because that was probably not appropriate, but I felt it in my heart, like, ooh, yay, we got a little bit of beat in here, that's great, and I'm one person. So at the end of the day, it's not about me, because I know from a music perspective, you're not gonna be able to please everybody. But if the intention at some point in time is to have an experience or worship experience that somebody, anybody, everybody can get behind, switching it up would be lovely, like representative of the cultures or of people that could come through these doors.
Yep.
So how do you feel about appropriation? How do you feel about a white choir singing black music?
I mean, if you don't...
The question was appropriation. What do we feel about cultural appropriation?
Oh, I guess
We'll just repeat the question.
I guess it depends on if there is someone who can help people understand the meaning behind that song and what it means to sing it. You know what I mean? Black people have a tendency to sing from the soul, and not that no one else does, but it is historically part of our culture, right? Singing, dancing, praise dancing, like that's a huge thing in a lot of black churches. And it's being joyful, and it's expressing the joy, showing the joy, like everyone in the church knows that you're joyful, right? But if a white choir wants to get behind that, I'm not complaining. If you know what you're doing and you can sing it and it makes you feel good, at the end of the day, if it makes you feel good and you want the congregation to feel good, I am not one to say no. By all means, take it on. I would challenge you to do that if it is something that you want to explore. And maybe being with another choir from a different church that has that experience would help you really be able to understand what you're singing.
I want you to look at the stained glass behind us. They're beautiful, they're incredible. I photographed them, I put them in curriculum, DVD packaging, because it's just, they're stunning, and I love looking at them. And I want you to see what the faces are, and the skin color, and the hair color. We don't have to smash them, but it's our indie. We gotta look at this, and we gotta say, we gotta name it. Every time we look at it, we gotta say, that's us bringing whiteness through our congregation. Don't smash them. Name it. Use it as a discovery tool. Meditate on it. Look at it. The organ, we're about to drop $500,000, and I voted for it, on an organ that is absolutely doubling down on European music. You can't argue that. You can't play any other kind of music on a pipe organ, in my estimation. So we got to own a $500,000 doubling down on white music. I would say that this is God's church, and we are its current occupants. So we can wear our Norwegian sweaters, but the church can't. It's God's church. So we got to get out of the way. And these are all surface level things. I just spotted that shield up there, which is a cool but very martial symbol of violence, medieval Europe. Again, you don't have to take it down, but you gotta name it, and you gotta own it. We all do. And that's ignoring other deeper things that are just, we don't notice because it's what we do, and it's who we have been. So that's my call, is that what are our Indiana Joneses in our private lives, in our work lives, in our family lives, and in our church life together? What are our Indiana Jones, beautiful, loved, but ultimately not sacred? And what happens if Jesus is Lord in all the decisions that we make? We wanted to talk about transformation. And again, I'm not here with strategy, and I'm not here with a curriculum. But I think our transformation requires three things. It requires meaningful personal experiences, like we talked about a couple weeks ago, where you just are with people and they change you and you change them, and that's real and it's really intentional. And you're pushed out of your comfort zone. We need culture change. And I don't mean that we can't have European music. I'm just saying we change how we see ourselves. And we need the love of God. So those personal experiences, culture change, and this is the challenge. And Jerry talked about culture. And the reason it's at the heart of this is that you've probably heard the phrase, culture eats policy for breakfast, or something like that. Like, you can make all the rules you want, you can have all the meetings you want, you can be up here all you want, but it's all in here. It's in our bodies, it's in our hearts. And it's the reason why we react to things the way we do. It's because it's not cerebral, it's encoded in our bodies. The KKK has an incredible culture built around really dumb things, but they have instilled an incredibly powerful culture that they hand down generationally. And the opposite of racism isn't non-racism, it's anti-racism. So how do we create a living, embodied culture of anti-racism with each other as white people, and all of us who come, to change ourselves generationally? That's what is required. And it's intentional, and it's not up here. It's how do we change who we are? And it starts with leaning into that discomfort. Like, when they go to the gym, they say, feel the burn, right? Like, the pain is, it's working. And that's the same here. And the image in the film of Ray Christensen with his wife, and she's in the kitchen. And she's crying. And she doesn't want to go there. And Ray's already gone there. And I don't want us to be his wife. I want us to be Ray. I want us to be brave and to lean into that discomfort. It's not an injury, it's muscles being built. And it's never shame, it's just discomfort. The other thing that I heard or read recently that blew my mind, and I can't believe I hadn't thought about it earlier, is other cultures, especially non-white cultures, really connect with their ancestors. That's a powerful, generative force. I am my ancestors' dreams come true, stuff like that, right? When your ancestors were enslaved or victims of genocide, being a survivor is a huge thing. We talk about our ancestors in, I think, pretty kind of precious ways, like I love my grandparents and they went through hard stuff and they were farmers and, but I don't have like a deep thing. But the thing that I read said we spend too much time making our ancestors proud and not enough time trying to make our descendants proud. What if that was what we did? Our descendants need us, not our ancestors. So I think we need to pray on that. How do we make our descendants proud of the choices we made, the changes in our culture that we made in this congregation, in our lives? And God is cheering us on. God's by our side. Talk, please. I'm done talking.
Yes.
Just a couple, I was at home watching it, and I'm like, oh my God, I have to go there, because I have to be part of this conversation. I've been on an anti-racist journey for a couple of years through work and different organizations and now church. And there's just a couple of things I want us to keep in mind as we're talking about difference, right? A big group of people from this church took the IDI a couple years ago, got debriefs, get on this continuum. The intercultural development assessment, inventory, there we go, inventory. Anyway, it just helped me really turn my way of thinking about other and difference. And I just want to make sure that we don't make people of color, we can't other them. They can't be so precious and othered or tokenized as we talk about welcoming them into this church. Like, I was really happy that you said, our demographics, Black people aren't going to drive to come to this church. They're not going to. So this work is within us, which I think you're really focusing on, you know. The curiosity about who they are. Right on TV, when Melvin Carter was being elected, a woman came up to him and said, oh, I love you. I'm so glad you're going to be our mayor. When I look at you, I don't see color. And he said, I really hope that you do, because his experience in the world is not the same. And it is really important that we take that to heart, that not seeing color, you have to see color. You have to see the difference in the color of everyone's skin. Her color is different than her mom's. She's having a different experience. So I just want to throw that into the circle too. And then you mentioned the music. So there was a thing on NPR a few weeks ago that some churches are doing this reconciliation between stealing slave songs and turning them into European hymns. It was so incredible to hear about it, and that, again, a white church was feeling uncomfortable singing some of these hymns that on the bottom of the pages you can see, like, what era they're from, who wrote it, African slave song. You know, it says it. It's like, where did that come from, and how did we put it to four-part harmony? So anyway, I just wanted to make those few points. Thank you.
Thank you. I will be honest, this becomes fun. At a certain point, it's a sport. And I wake up and I dream about this stuff and I look for it. Because once you realize it's not about you, then it's a fun activity. It's like, wow, look at all the ways in which this stuff has permeated in ways we don't see unless you go really looking for it.
Well, and this, I will say that talking about race in general and differences has been an interesting journey just in our household, right? Because the way he sees the world is very different than the way I see the world.
How white am I, Toya?
You're super white.
I'm the whitest white person.
He's so white. Like,
which gives everybody hope.
Yes, and there are very times where there are lots of times where he'll say something and I'm like, he'll say, well, people do X, Y, Z, and I'll be like, what people? And he'll go, well, white people. I'm like, we'll say that next time.
And that's it.
White people say that. Yeah. I don't say that. Like, what was it this morning you said? You said a term about...
the prop? Are you talking about the hat?
No, not the hat. We were talking about something, and you mentioned the word boob. Sorry, guys.
Oh, boob tube.
Gabe was explaining
where the
television.
word YouTube came from. And I think maybe because we called it the boob tube as a kid.
And so I said, who called it the boob tube? Because I did not grow up with that terminology. I was not set in my house. So he was like, white people. I was like, okay, let's just call it what it is. Like, so we have lots of conversations about race, life, culture, religion, because we have to. Because in order for us to get to a point where we understand each other and we're comfortable with each other and our kids are comfortable with who they are, we have to talk about this stuff. And we can't run from it. We can't shy away from it. And, you know, Kevin said earlier, there's no shame in any of this, right? The things that have happened in our history, they're not yours. They're not mine, right? My people have done things that I am not proud of, but that's not a reflection of me. What white people have done historically, and when I say white people, I'm talking about way back in the day, not you, that's not a reflection of who you are. But not doing anything with the knowledge you have, knowing that there is systemic racism everywhere, including in the church. When you just kind of turn a blind eye to that stuff and say, it's not my problem, then you are perpetuating it. You're keeping it going. It's never gonna end as long as people just don't do anything. And one of the things that I think I enjoy the most, what I've always enjoyed watching, especially with my kids, and with kids in general, right? There are a lot of kids who don't have these burdens that we carry when we talk about race. They play together. They enjoy each other, right? They have a good time. They make play dates and future plans. Yet adults have a really hard time doing that. They talk about all kinds of stuff, and if they don't understand what they're talking about, they figure it out. They figure out how to problem solve. They do things in a way that we don't know how to do or that we've stopped doing. But then they're taught at some point in time in their lives that they cannot continue to do these very carefree things that they've always done, where they have just kind of lived a life of, harmony, and someone says, nope, you got to pay attention to this now, or you got to look at this. It's all that stuff that you start becoming, that you're ingrained with, where you have to now suddenly change how you talk when you're around a certain group of people, right? You have to be cognizant about how you say things. Someone told me, and I'm not naming any names, but it's a person that goes to this congregation, that I have been perceived to be too, I don't want to say loud, but that I just speak my mind and that could be dangerous. And I don't know that I've ever done that. Like, I'm not on enough of anything to be a person to say anything. I will be honest, I question stuff when I don't understand it, because there are a lot of things that just don't make sense. I'm on council, and when we come to vote on something, I'm like, you guys seem to already know what you want. Why are we even wasting our time voting on this? Again, I don't know. I'm not a political person. I'm just like, can our time be better spent talking about something else, or do we have to vote on something that you already know you want? I mean, it just make it make sense. So it was really interesting to me once I had gotten that feedback, and I was like, well, I don't know, how often do I talk on council?
Only when you don't understand something.
Right. Otherwise, I have a tendency to just be quiet, because I don't want people to feel like if I say something that I am questioning the status quo. Like, who are you to ask the question, right? We're all part of this congregation. I have the right, as being a person on council, to make sure that I understand that if we're voting for things or whatever it is that we're doing, that I'm doing the right thing. But I am not the person to cause trouble, because that is not in my DNA at all. But it's a perception, right? Which makes me it makes me sad to think that someone would think that is who I am, when in fact it's not. And unfortunately, it's an experience I have had in the past, in my professional life specifically, where I just kind of go, okay, cool, I'm minding my own business going forward. And I am the person who doesn't ever say anything. I just allow things to be until it becomes, unless it's a problem that directly affects me. But I've always been very protective of who I am and my personality. And I get along with people, I've always gotten along with people, all people, all the time. There's never a person that I would say I don't like unless you're threatening. And that's, again, few people have been in that circle. But otherwise, I have a tendency to get along with everybody. So I'm always very protective of how people see me, which is, I don't know it's bad to even feel that way, because I don't think a lot of other people have to walk around feeling like they need to fit the mold of what's expected. Whereas I feel like I do. And so to do that, I will not do certain things or not say certain things or not say certain things a certain way. So I'm trying to be better at just being myself, because that's the hard part when you look like me. You can't just be yourself, right? I can be myself in my house, I can be myself around my family, but when I step inside of church or I step inside of my job, I suddenly have to be somebody else so that people don't think different of me. And I don't think that in some respects it's unconscious, because I'm so used to doing it, so I don't realize I'm doing it until I've done it. But I want us to be cognizant of the fact that when we step foot in this congregation, in this house of God, that we are our authentic selves, right? Don't be different because you're around me. Be you, because that's what I find attractive about people, when they are their authentic selves. I love people for who they are, not for who you think you need to be because you're next to me. You know, especially if you don't have experiences with other people of color any other time of your life, and I'm your only experience. Just be you. I'm no different than anybody else. I don't represent my culture at all. I was born and raised here, so you guys should know that. Like, I used to always be called, when I was younger, I was always told that I was a white person trapped in a black person's body. Just, again, it's...
Our teenager calls himself that.
Our teenager calls himself that, but it's assimilation when you think about it, right? We are trying to adhere to the standard. And so you do all the things that you think you're supposed to do that is accepted, and you don't realize it until later on in life that this is now what your identity is. And at the end of the day, I wouldn't change anything. It has made me who I am and made me see the world in a way that has opened my eyes to a lot. But being here every Sunday feeds me, and I want it to feed my kids. And I do the things that I do in terms of the being on council and, being a part of Sunday school, being a part of a commission, because I want my children to see that I have a stake in our congregation and that I'm involved. And as a parent, I want them to know what being part of a congregation, what that means, what that looks like, what your commitment is to God and what God's commitment is to you. And even though being a Lutheran is a new thing for me, 10 years, I was not born Lutheran, I was born Baptist. This has been a struggle. Trying to understand the traditions and the rituals, and thank God for my brother and my father-in-law, because Lord, there's a lot of things I would be like, I don't understand why you do that. And I don't understand a lot of things, but it's my faith journey, I think, has been very, very important with this congregation because of how I came to be in this congregation and because of the welcoming. So when we talk about how we change what we change, when we talk about how we welcome people, what I would say is be your authentic self. That is the only reason why I'm here, because there were some very authentic women who did not know who I was outside of this congregation, and they were welcoming. It was the older, for all intents and purposes, all you older people. It was you guys. It wasn't people my age. My mother-in-law dragged me to the YMCA with a brand new baby, and whoever she swam with and did strength training for active older adults, those were my people. Twice a week. And then eventually she dragged me to the getting fit class with the Faith. I was the youngest person besides Gabe, so there was that. But it was all of that. That was my connection and that was my in. It was not listening to a pastor. It was not being part of anything else. It was the women and their welcoming and them taking my baby from me whenever it appeased them. And that was what I felt, just genuine love from a bunch of older women. And I think for me that was important because I did not have any older women in my life. So I needed that at the time. So just keep being your authentic selves. I think that that will take us very far, but we also need to examine other aspects of what it means to welcome people and be welcoming and live in our mission and our values.
When we're
Amen, and thank you.
Thank you.
I was going to say, when we're examining culture and when we're examining whiteness and we're changing culture, I don't mean that we're not being our authentic selves. We absolutely are. Wear that Norwegian sweater. Be your full self. The only thing we're taking apart is the stuff we didn't put there. The stuff that is invisible and harmful. And a transformed church will be incredibly attractive to people. They'll see it. They'll feel it. It won't be because we smashed out the windows or didn't invest in the organ. It will be because we changed the way we don't think about race and racism while still being our amazing, wonderful, loving selves. And that, then people will come, I think. It will be different.
Thank you so much, Kevin and Toya. And I know Hal may be watching, so thanks to Hal, too, for his cooperative work on that. You've been so gracious and really showed some vulnerability with us and for this topic. So I'm very humbled and honored that you all decided to do this. So thank you for teaching us, for speaking from the heart, and speaking with such grace and also challenge. The thing that's going to stick in my heart is that shame and blame is not going to get us anywhere. However, if we don't examine going forward for the sake of our children, then we have lost, the opportunity to unravel all of this structural racism. I'm so glad, Toya, you brought up the writing retreat, because that RIC process is another step on the journey of what we're talking about. This isn't a one-off, session where we all sort of comment on what we've heard. This is part of a strategy of this congregation that have started with things before I even got here. But so there's the writing retreat on Saturday, March 19th. I hope many of you might consider coming, because it's going to be about all the things that Kevin and Toya are talking about. How do we think through and write through ways that we are called to speak to our descendants, to we address these issues of racism and bias and things like that. Also, at the beginning of this year, Mary and Caitlin and I decided we were going to make adult ed theology and practice. So that's why we held a session at the end of the fall that said, now that we've done a session on the RIC process, now that we've had Jennings for the Indigenous sessions, now that we know we're going to be talking about racism during Black History Month, what are ways to put feet to our faith? And I don't know how many of you noticed, because it was the annual meeting and we were all going through 2 hours of discussion about finances and voting on the mission appeal, but the other thing that you all approved was an annual discussion on reparative justice. Every fall now, there will be a $500 match from this congregation, and we will have a discussion, hopefully in solidarity with other siblings around the community, about addressing structural inequality. And that's something that we're planting, a seed, so that we can continue this path. The mission appeal is another opportunity for how we're going to do outreach and how we'll continue this work of grace and action in the world. So there's these steps that we're continuing to take together. So thanks be to God for your time. Can we please give another round of applause to Kevin and Toya? Amen. Thanks be to God. And thanks, Hal. I know you're watching. Jerry, I know you wanted to say something. Maybe you can talk to them afterwards, just for the sake of time. I'm so sorry. So thank you. Go and have a wonderful rest of your Sabbath, and thanks for being a part of this.
And what's your Indiana Jones?
Yeah.
All day, every day.
Right. Name your indie. Name your indie.
Thank you.
fire spot.